Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon, where I take a look at each episode of classic Doctor Who one day at a time. I do apologize if this first episode is a bit shorter, just because I have caught a slight cold that I'm trying to get over. It should be over. I should be over it in a couple of days, but it makes it slightly more difficult to speak at this normal level, and it sort of has that weird feeling in your throat. But today we have, on the 6th of November 2017, we have the Macra episode 1, and I have to say, this episode knows how to be overtly disturbing. And what I mean by that is that as an episode, it essentially works on this idea. It sort of works on this idea that putting up just this happy front that everything's okay, nothing bad could possibly happen. And that is just great. I love the way that the episode sort of pulls together this creepy sort of feeling that, you know, nothing's quite right in this colony, but the colony itself does hold a deep secret, that there are these insect-like things that we see at the very, very end of the episode, and they are rather creepy. You basically have this thing like, oh, nothing bad ever happens here. We love to work. We mine gas, and it has many uses. We're not going to say what any of those uses are, of course. No, we just mine gas for uses. It has its uses, and that is legitimately creepy. You sort of have this feeling that, well, what are they not telling us? Is it like what sort of uses could this gas really have? And of course, the big reveal is that there are these crab-like things, and it's just a really good thing. This is a script from Ian Stewart Black, who wrote The War Machines and The Savages, which were both, and I think this might be one of the. This is working with a very, very interesting idea. And as a start, it does a very, very good job of starting the story and giving us something to look forward to. I think that everything that is put down is great. Patrick Troughton feels he's very, very good in this episode. He plays up the more he's playing up some of the creepier aspects. He's not quite trusting, like, everything's so pristine and everything's just so happy that, you know, something just has to be wrong. You can't. Nowhere is this happy, like this crazy happy place. It's all just sort of it's and you know, you really feel like something is gonna really fall apart when you see just sort of what happens. And that being said, I'm gonna have to. I also have to say that Michael Craze's Ben is pretty much a non-entity, which that is the really only problem with the episode, is that Ben and Polly are non-entities. Jamie gets a couple of things to do, which makes his presence a bit more, but other than that, the episode is pretty good, so I'm going to give the Macra episode 1 an 8 out of 10. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is now the 7th of November, 2017. I still have a cold, and I just finished watching the episode 2 of the Macra, and it seems we have another really, really strong episode. It seems like that's sort of becoming a theme right now, that we're getting some pretty strong episodes to, you know, basically to compete with for the story. And the Macra episode 2, it plays out almost like a horror story. Like, basically, it's a bit divisive of the Velvet Web from the Keys of Marinus, which was the best episode of Keys of Marinus, but this time the monsters are much more threatening than the Velvet Web. You have the Doctor knows that there's something wrong with this colony, that there is these crab creatures, the Macra, even though in this episode everyone just if the colony just denies it, even Ben. What's interesting is Ben is the one who gets hypnotized. Everyone else isn't hypnotized, unlike the Velvet Web, where Barbara was the only one who could see the place for what it was. and everyone else was hypnotized. And I have to say that having Ben be hypnotized is a great idea. Like, it makes a lot of sense considering he's like the sort of working class. He's a sailor. He's the working class. It's a love sort of thing where he's sort of just he's gonna be going along with it. Like he rats out the doctor, even though the doctor's like, right, right. This is wrong, and this place is evil. Something's totally wrong here, and we probably will have to stop it just because, that's what the doctor does. I love that Polly doesn't get hypnotized as she was always sort of upper class. She was a secretary on Earth, which in the 60s that was sort of a, I don't know if that was a high-paying job, but I guess, she obviously had to be a bit more intelligent to do it, because she had to write, and apparently, so there was a point where it made sense for her to be doing math as part of her job. And Jamie, he's too simple. He's almost too simple-minded, being from the past. He's superstitious, so he doesn't trust the weird voices that tell him that the colony is good, work for the colony, become with us. And it's great. I also have to say that this episode is helped by the fact that the Macra designs are not the best and they're most convincing. The few clips that we have of them and the few stills we have of them, they're always basked in shadows. You really only see their claws, which are probably the best parts of the costume, at least the most realistic looking. They're still not perfectly convincing, but that is not saying much considering what sort of thing we're used to. You have, and what's interesting is that Ben, he only takes off his conditioning as long as the Macra are there, and Polly is in danger, which we see in sort of a mix of reconstruction and, of course, some clips that survive, which I am very glad that they survive, because that footage, however scant it is, it still gives us an idea of what the monsters look like, and hopefully the direction is still as good if in the full sequence, if this ever story becomes recovered, because I would like to see this recovered, at least this episode and the last one, because we have some really creepy stuff here. And what's interesting is that this is sort of all taking place almost in real time, and I also have to say is Patrick Troughton is excellent as the Doctor. He's working very much as the conniver, working behind the scenes for things to work out, and he isn't front and center, no, he's just sort of in the background planning and plotting and being all sorts of creepy. And I love it. He is great at the Doctor. I love the way that he portrays the character and the way that things seem to be going for that. I also have to say that the cliffhanger is excellent as we see the controller, which was just a picture. He's actually an old man, and he is just as scared. The Macra, they aren't just monsters. They have this booming, deep voice of the propaganda is the Macra feeding it to them, and so when the Doctor, Jamie, and Polly demand, well, make him speak, the Macra speaks. He says some stuff, and the controller basically gives up the plot, oh, this is awful, and he gets attacked for it, and that's the big ending. It is a pretty creepy ending, all things considered. It's very, very creepy when it comes to, just sort of what goes on. One of the problems, of course, that the Macra, one, the episode is missing, so we don't see nearly as much of the action, and two, it goes on just for a little too long, and three, the Macra probably aren't as convincing, so I'm going to give the Macra Terror episode 2 a 9 out of 10. Right, it is the 8th of November 2017, and I just finished watching episode 3 of the Macra Terror, and this has actually taken a bit of a dip in quality, mainly for the fact that episode 3 is nowhere near as enjoyable as episodes 1 and 2. They are essentially stories. They're essentially just episodes that sort of leave everything up to, it's sort of an episode that just sort of, it's a very, very visual episode, so you just sort of, you can't have as much fun with it as you do. There are plenty of points where there are little clips, but a lot of those are just dialogue, so it's not like any actions. You do get a really good insight into Patrick Troughton's performance that way, but that doesn't help matters, mainly because you have you basically just have the story really sort of existing as it does. It's nowhere, but it's not a bad episode. There's quite a few things to like. Michael Craze as Ben gives a solid performance, and Annika Wills as Polly is also good. Jamie really does get to shine as he's the one who he goes down into the mines, and he actually, the big cliffhanger is that he gets cornered by the Macra in a scene that's just a bit too drawn out for my liking, but it's still good enough to just sort of be that sort of creep factor, and you just you get that feeling that something's creeping around in the dark, and it's not nothing's really there to be, as good as it was. You just sort of have everything just sort of creep up on you and let it sort of wash over you in a basically a display of fear, and that's something that the episode does really, really well. I like the episode. It's a good episode, but it's not near the quality of the other ones. It's got some problems. Ben's a bit overacting at points when he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna," basically he stops sort of being as much of, he's no longer, when he's, I don't want to say he stops being hypnotized, he starts to be conflicted about him being hypnotized and working for the colony, which is just a bit too cheesy and a bit too much of a, we've seen this all before, there's nothing really new here that we really need, because we just sort of we've seen it all before. It's something that is known. We know sort of where things are, which story beats are going to be hit and how they're going to be hit. So you just you let the story end, and that's about it. So I'm going to give the Macra episode 3 I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10, just because it's not as good as the other 2 episodes. Alright, so it is the 9th of November 2017, and I just finished watching the Macra episode 4, and I have to say that we have gotten a definite quality increase from the previous episode, mainly because this one actually concludes the story, and it does it in a very snappy way, whereas episode 3 was a very, very long, padded out, almost mess of an episode that just didn't quite know how it wanted to finish everything up and get us to what would eventually, of course, be the conclusion. The biggest portion of the Macra episode 4 is the fact that the doctor actually is able to convince everyone in the colony that the Macra indeed are real, and they do indeed exist in the colony, and they are indeed manipulating everything, and it all sort of wraps up just in a nice little bow. It's not focused too much on how it's going to wrap up. It just sort of goes on. It's like, right, we're wrapping everything up, and we're just gonna wrap everything up, and we are going just to make sure that everything sort of stays the way that we want it. So that being said, we have quite a lot of a couple of things that I do really, really enjoy about this episode. Mainly, Patrick Troughton is again a delight. He portrays the Doctor as this extremely just sort of bubbly character. He's very much in line with what the Moonbase portrayed him as, and that's mainly going to be, I think, what the character goes for from now until the end of the show. From now and for a while at least. He is going to be just this sort of. We're going to get this sort of crafty little crafty character who's sort of, you never really know, can you trust him? And I really do enjoy that performance. Patrick Troughton does a great job. I'd also say that Michael Craze actually gets a real chance to shine as he gets to redeem himself. Ben gets to break the hypnosis and is able to essentially just revert back to the character that he was already, which is definitely what the story needed. The whole Ben is evil thing was sort of dragging on. It was dragging on a lot. It was a very, it wasn't needed to be dragged out for that long. But that being said, there's a main problem is that the Macra get defeated off screen. Like, the Macra are great villains. We just don't see much of them, and they're defeated off screen. That's really my only problem with the episode. So, I'm going to give the Macra Terror episode 4 a 9 out of 10. That being said, we can then average out each episode for the Macra Terror to reach a 8.25 out of 10. Thank you, everybody, for watching the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. Please leave a comment, like, and subscribe. And as the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon will return in the Faceless ones.